Hey there, movie fans. Welcome to a brand new episode of Rank and File. I'm your host, Scott Movie Mantz. And before we get started, I just wanted to ask everyone watching to please join the movement for Black Americans, the movement for equality, the movement for change, the movement for justice, the movement for liberation. Go to blacklivesmatter.com, find out what action you can take, and if possible, please make a donation and thank you. Now, in the last episode of Rank and File, I ranked all the Batman films, so it seems only appropriate. Let's do the Superman movies, ranking from worst to best. And let's get right to it with number 9 on the list, which is Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. Directed by Sidney J. FURIE, release date July 24th, 1987, cost is $17 million. Domestic grosses 15.7, worldwide grosses 36.7. Rotten Tomatoes score is 11%. Look, I like what Superman 4 had to say, but I just didn't like how it was said. The movie was low budget and it looked cheap. It was an embarrassment. As much as I love seeing Christopher Reeve as Superman, this movie was bad, and not even the greatest criminal mind of our time, Gene Hackman, could save it. Let's move on to number 8 on the list, which is Superman 3, directed by Richard Lester. Release date June 17th, 1983. Budget $39 million. Domestic gross $60 million. Worldwide gross $80 million. Rotten Tomatoes score is 26%. Not gonna lie, I kind of like Superman 3. I had fun with it. Here's why. It just feels so different from the first 2 Superman movies. Problem is, it's too much slapstick, and it feels more like a Richard Pryor movie than a Superman film. But Superman 3 does have its merits. One of them has Clark Kent going back to Smallville for his high school reunion and hooking up with Lana Lang, played by Annette O'Toole. The best scene of the movie, though, has to be the fight in the junkyard between the evil Superman and Clark Kent. That was a great scene, and it's probably the closest we'll ever get to having a fight between Superman and Bizarro. Moving up to number 7 is Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Directed by Zack Snyder, release date March 23rd, 2016. Budget $250 million. Domestic gross is $330 million. Worldwide gross is $874 million. Rotten Tomatoes score is 28%. Now, I talked a lot about Batman v Superman in the Batman Rank and File, but I'll say again that I think it was a mistake to have Batman and Superman too similar. But overall, I thought the movie was too long, it was too dramatic, and it took itself a little too seriously. Moving up to number 6 on the list is Justice League, directed by Zack Snyder with Joss Whedon, uncredited. Release date November 17th, 2017. Budget $300 million. Domestic gross is $229 million. Worldwide gross is $658 million. Rotten Tomatoes score is 40%. I also talked about Justice League in the Batman Rank and File episode, but I'll say again that I like Justice League. I think it's solid. I think it's great to see the DC superheroes get together, but Avengers did beat them to the punch in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so I felt like this did pale a little bit in comparison. And I gotta say that of all the films in which Henry Cavill played Superman so far, I felt that this was the best one. Maybe because he had Superman down, he had him under his skin a little bit, and I think that Justice League does work on its own merits. It's a good film. Moving up to number 5 is Man of Steel, directed by Zack Snyder. Release date June 14th, 2013. Cost $225 million. Domestic gross $291 million. Worldwide gross is $668 million. Rotten Tomatoes score is 56%. I liked Man of Steel, but I didn't love it. I think it's good. It's not great. It's too dark, takes itself too seriously. I get they wanted to do something different from the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. I get that they wanted to do something different from the earlier Christopher Reeve movies. But They tried to make Superman like Batman, and that's because this film is executive produced by Christopher Nolan, who did the Dark Knight movies. But you can't do for Superman what you did with Batman. I felt like Henry Cavill was a little too stiff, and he didn't have great chemistry with Amy Adams, who played Lois Lane. Probably the best thing about Man of Steel is actually Russell Crowe as Jor-El. He was fantastic. And while I like the production design and the special effects are incredible, the last hour of this movie was non-stop action, and I got battle fatigue. Moving up to number 4 is Superman Returns, directed by Bryan Singer, release date June 28th, 2006. Cost is $200 million. Domestic gross is $200 million. Worldwide gross, $391 million. Rotten Tomatoes score is 75%. I like Superman Returns a lot. It is a love letter to the Richard Donner movie, and Bryan Singer wore his heart on his sleeve. But is it too much of a love letter? Because Superman Returns does draw unfavorable comparisons to the first 2 Superman movies. I thought Kevin Spacey was okay as Lex Luthor, but he's no Gene Hackman. A little too much fan service here, but it does have a great blend of action, heart, and humor, and Superman Returns is fun. Moving up to number 3 is Superman 2, the Donner Cut, and it is a miracle that this film exists. Richard Donner, who was let go from Superman 2 when he was about 75% of the way through filming. So this movie feels like a holy grail, taking the Donner footage and finishing the movie. It does feel disjointed and choppy, but it does have Marlon Brando as Jor-El, and the scene in which Jor-El says goodbye to Superman is really, really moving. Overall, I love Superman 2, the Donner Cut, because it was just so great to have a new Superman movie with the great Christopher Reeve. Moving up to number 2 is Superman 2, the Lester Cut. Yes, directed by Richard Lester. Release date June 19th, 1981. Cost is $54 million. Domestic gross $108 million. Worldwide gross is $190 million. Rotten Tomatoes score is 87%. This Superman 2 feels more like an action movie compared to its predecessor from 1978. Of course, you have the 3 villains from the Phantom Zone. General Zod, played by the great Terrence Stamp. What a great performance. His dialogue, kneel before Zod. This is a rousing action movie. I love the scene outside the Daily Planet when Superman is standing there or flying there with his arms folded and says, "Would you care to step outside?" It is such a great, great moment. I love the love story between Superman and Lois Lane. Superman giving up everything for the love of his life. I do prefer the Lester Cut over the Donner Cut. Richard Lester's version does feel more like a complete and fully realized movie. But of course, I do love the Donner Cut. But I think the Lester Cut's the movie that I grew up with. I saw it 100 times. So which version do you love more, the Lester Cut or the Donner Cut? Let me know in the comments below. But Christopher Reeve in this movie, just to show you how great his performance is that he's so sweet as the bumbling Clark Kent. But as Superman, the scene where he flies under the Eiffel Tower to save Lois Lane when the elevator is in free fall, and she looks up in surprise, and he looks at her and says, "I believe this is your floor." That is what made Christopher Reeve great as Superman, which is why the number 1 movie, let's move up and away to number 1. It is Superman the movie, directed by Richard Donner. Release date December 15th, 1978. Cost is $55 million. Domestic gross $134 million. Worldwide gross is $300 million. Rotten Tomatoes score is 94%. It all started with the tagline on the teaser movie poster: "You will believe a man can fly." And boy, did we believe it. Superman the movie isn't just the best Superman movie by far. It is the greatest superhero comic book movie of them all. And Superman the movie is actually 3 movies in one. 3 movies with 3 completely different tones that all work together. You have the sci-fi element on Krypton, the Douglas Sirk element in Smallville, and the sort of snappy His Girl Friday tone in Metropolis. Richard Donner just did such a great job directing this movie, and what a great cast. Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, still one of the very best superhero villains ever on the big screen. Marlon Brando as Jor-El. 2 great performances by Christopher Reeve. He was great as Superman, and he was great as Clark Kent. John Williams did an amazing score, one of his very best, the very best score for a superhero movie of them all. It has yet to be topped. You can hear Superman in the theme. Superman, da, 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 da. I mean, it's so rousing. And I just love at the end of the film when Superman is flying above the earth and he looks into the camera and smiles. Everything about Superman the movie is perfect. The movie holds up after more than 40 years. It is the greatest superhero movie of them all. And I would like to dedicate this episode of Rank and File to John Schnepp. Passed away a couple years ago, but he left behind a great film called The Death of Superman Lives. What happened? This movie, Superman Lives, was supposed to be directed by Tim Burton, and it was going to star Nicolas Cage as Superman. There's so much detail in this film, it almost feels like Superman Lives actually did happen. So look for The Death of Superman Lives. You can find it on Amazon. Check it out. And this one's for you, John Schnepp. Until the next episode of Rank and File, here's looking at you, kid.